Hey everyone, this video will give you an understanding of being too self-critical as well as how you can avoid it. Being too self-critical slows down the learning process significantly, and it also hinders your performance and mindset, ultimately causing you to lose games. First, we'll be going over what counts as being too self-critical, then we'll go over self-constructive criticism, and then finish off the video with tips and strategies on avoiding destructive self-criticism. Alright, first up, what does it mean to be too self-critical? It can be described as harmful self-evaluation. Self-evaluation in itself is pretty healthy, since it means we're self-aware of our mistakes. But as with all things, too much of it can be harmful. It's usually experienced as negative internal thoughts about yourself, and it can also be experienced as perfectionism. Unfortunately, perfectionism is a double-edged sword. If we achieve the goals we set, it provides a pretty significant morale boost, but what if we can't? Then it accomplishes the exact opposite. It leads us to self-rumination. Self-rumination is the negative recycling of negative thinking. So what else is being too self-critical? It's being too hard on yourself. Don't forget that we are our own worst enemies, and if we spend all of our time being too hard on ourselves, we miss out on so much more time to learn. In fact, being self-critical can often lead to perceiving small mistakes as catastrophic and unfixable. So why are we too self-critical? The answer? Because we think by being hard on ourselves, we will achieve our goals. It's a coach mentality. Everyone has their inner coach, and when that coach gets out of hand, things become problematic. We do it to keep ourselves in check. We think that the constant stream of critical comments in our head will eventually help us fix those stupid mistakes. You might have heard a streamer say, "I'm so bad," or "I'm a boosted animal," but as you'll learn, this kind of criticism actually doesn't help us fix our mistakes, as funny as they may be. Okay, so what are the outcomes then? It damages our self-esteem and disrupts our peaceful, positive mind. It undermines our accomplishments and makes them seem insignificant to the mistakes we just made, which is obviously not always the case. It also deviates our focus from improving and having fun to, "Oh, I'm such a failure, I can't do anything right." How about our performance? Absolutely. Without going into much of the neuroscience, it hinders our performance by inhibiting our ability to focus on problem solving, which we know to be a fundamental part of League of Legends as well. It also leaves us vulnerable to other negative emotions that have their own toll on performance. This way of thinking embraces a negative mindset, which suggests a negative outcome and lack of enjoyment. Last but not least, being too self-critical can turn into self-rumination, which we've already talked about, and can exacerbate and cause depression in extreme cases. Next, let's talk about what self-constructive criticism is, as well as its characteristics. As you've probably guessed, one way to stop being too self-critical is to replace those comments with self-constructive criticism. So what is this? It's your mind offering well-reasoned solutions to problems. It focuses on improving, and you take away something from your mistake with your evaluation. It's also being inquisitive and challenging your ideas, or in other words, being open to change. It's a healthy way of becoming self-aware. However, there are a few things to look out for when constructively criticizing ourselves. First, the comments need to be somewhat specific. You want to avoid general statements like, "I need to stop dying," and instead use statements such as, "I need to play more defensively early on with late game focused champions such as Vayne." The first statement doesn't really offer a clear solution, while the second one is much more focused. You can get even more specific and say, "It's okay for me to give up a few CS and soak up experience until I hit level 3. Furthermore, constructive criticism needs to be directed towards changeable behavior, not yourself. Don't put yourself into the crossfire. Saying things such as, "I suck," is highly unproductive and damaging to your self-esteem, so we want to critique your behavior, like so. "My decision to ward in the late game with no enemies on the minimap was wrong, and I need to avoid face-checking brushes, especially on the enemy side of the map." And as a final step, make sure that the amount of criticism is within reason. Don't overload yourself. Now, let's jump into some tips on snapping out of harmful self-criticism. The transition from excessive self-criticism to constructive self-criticism is as follows. First, realize that you're in a situation that leads to self-critical thoughts. Next, understand that the outcome is going to have both physiological and psychological components. Last, you need to have a logical response and constructive criticism to replace the self-critical thoughts. Let's analyze and give examples of each for clarity. First, you have a situation. For example, "I just gave up a kill while pushing too far into mid lane. I also died because I was ganked and did not flash immediately." This situation might lead to something like, "Why didn't I flash immediately? Now I've lost lane and probably the game." Eventually, the physiological and psychological outcomes arise. Physiologically, you're probably becoming stressed, heartbeat rising or finger shaking, and psychologically, you're becoming emotionally unstable. You can't get back into the mindset of winning the game. The question now, how do we solve this? The answer? You need to prepare yourself for the incoming self-critical thought. Quickly realize the consequences and come up with a logical response to remedy the situation. For example, instead of the situation leading to a detrimental and internal monologue, we say, I'm kind of new at mid lane and it's going to take some time while I figure out when to play aggressively. I didn't want to waste my flash, so I kept it for a bit more than I intended. I think in regards of CS, I've done pretty well, but I definitely should look to improve my flash mechanics. So, in general, for every self-critical thought, just remind yourself of one of your strengths and something you're good at. This way you know your weaknesses and strengths and you don't get lost in the pessimism. Now, for some general tips. First, try to understand your harsh, self-critical comments. Psychological processes such as these tend to be rigid and patterned. Once you identify it though, it's easier to fix. So maybe every time you miss a skill shot, your mind instantly goes, man, I'm really bad, but understanding this comment allows you to change it to constructive self-criticism. Next, don't get stuck in the past. It's essential to reflect on your mistakes, however, simply identify and correct the mistake, move on, and enjoy your present. Another great thing you can do is avoid comparing yourself to others. Something like, everybody does this but I can't, I'm just really not good enough, is very unproductive. Last but not least, treat yourself with the same compassion that you would give to a friend who's suffering. We usually tend to be hard on ourselves but compassionate to others. Being compassionate to ourselves might seem weird at first, but the effects it has on our mental well-being is undeniable. Give it a shot. Well, that's it for today. Thanks for watching everyone, and I hope you've enjoyed this guide. See you next time.